Season 11 brings with it many new features as well as significant changes to existing systems like temporary and masterworking. However, the question is change always a good thing? In this video, I'm going to break down my experience with the Season 11 PTR and give you a breakdown of the good, bad, and ugly that I experienced. First, let's talk about a new seasonal crafting mechanic. Tyrael is back as the first angel descending from heaven, and with him comes a new mechanic called Sanctification. What Sanctification does is it replaces an affix on a piece of gear with a new one, even allowing you to roll an additional affix on an item. Now, this isn't without risk though. To be able to do this, your item needs to already be tempered and fully masterworked. And then at this point, you could sanctify the item. It can no longer have any modifications attached to it. Now, this is a bit risky as the affix can get replaced with a random stat, which can at times be worse than you already had. For example, imagine you chose to sanctify your mythic unique helm, a Shaco, only to lose the cooldown reduction for something like resistance or no durability loss. That would be devastating. In the PTR, it looks like the affixes that you can get are non-offensive. I believe this was a bug, so you will be able to get offensive aspects when Season 11 does go live. Now, with this system, a lot of people compare it to systems in Path of Exile, like the Val Orbs, where you can quote-unquote corrupt an item and modify it unpredictably, but again, not be able to modify it further. Now, as someone like myself who blasts every season and loves competing on the pits and the leaderboards, I like this mechanic because it allows me to save up additional pieces of duplicate gear I have and play around with Sanctification and see what results I can end up with. That being said though, I do worry for players that may be a little bit busier or more casual, because say you did get that mythic unique, you went to sanctify it, end up losing a core affix and essentially bricking the item, that could spell the end of the season for them. So we will see if this mechanic gets adjusted prior to Season 11 going live. Speaking of climbing leaderboards, we have a new activity called the Tower coming in Season 11, and it really is almost a sister activity to the Pit. So you'll go to the obelisk in Karagar, but now you have the option to select an activity called the Tower. The differences between the Pit and the Tower is that the Tower is 10 minutes long. It has 5 floors instead of 2, and honestly, that's something I really enjoy because blasting through the Pit in quick builds like a teleport Sork or an evade Spiritborn, there are a lot of times where I could miss a wing on one floor and have to backtrack all the way because there weren't enough monsters for me to take down on that second floor. So having a 3rd, 4th, and 5th completely resolves that issue. Also added to the tower are pylons, which are returning from Diablo 3. The way these work is that these pylons have a shield that you have to attack and break down, and then you could activate them, and they are more powerful than their shrine equivalent. The problem I experience here though is that the pylon shields take a lot to take down, especially at higher levels of the tower, and there's a brief animation which gives an additional 2-second delay before you can use the pylon. And also, the only really impactful one is the power pylon. The rest aren't that significant. So this adds a bit of unfavorable RNG to the tower, where if the pylon you get is not a power pylon, then you essentially lost time given the effort required to trigger it. I would like to see buffs to the other pylons like the speed and the channeling, particularly if speed can be uncapped in terms of how much movement speed and attack speed it gives you. I think that'll give it a lot more value. And frankly, based on my PTR experience, I'd like to see the animation for it to come online removed and the shield either significantly reduced in HP to make the pylon available or just completely removed as well. After experiencing it, let's be blunt and speak about the elephant in the room. The tower is very similar, if not almost identical to the pit, and I do not think in its current state there's enough to differentiate it with the other activity. The only incentive to complete the tower is to go on the leaderboards, which is similar to the gauntlet that was introduced in Season 3. The issue with this though is that unlike the gauntlet, there is a lot of random aspects to the tower in terms of tile sets you'll get, monster families you'll get, as well as the new pylon. There is going to be still a lot of fishing involved, and also one thing I forgot to mention is that in the tower, for you to progress, you not only have to kill monsters, but elites and champion packs will drop orbs that you have to pick up as well. which can be a bit frustrating when you're trying to clear as fast as possible, having to wait for those to pop up after you killed an enemy. I'd like to see the pickup radius here increased, as well as give pets the ability to pick up these orbs. The tower does not have any rewards. If I were to compare this to Diablo 3, I imagine that the devs' goals were to have the pit similar to Nephilim rifts and the tower similar to greater rifts, which were attached to leaderboards. But a couple things that were missing from the greater rifts was that you got a lot of rewards as well. You got the legendary gems that you could only get from that activity, and you could also use Konai's Cube to take those gems dependent on its level and augment gear with primary stats, essentially giving you a method to infinitely increase your character's power as long as you could keep climbing up greater rifts. Also, greater rifts provided a ton of experience as well as loot on completion. All of those rewards are missing with the tower, and I feel like they'll be felt greatly by the audience. Next, let's talk about the changes to tempering and masterworking. Tempering was always a pain point in that it was the only crafting mechanic that can brick your item with finite rolls. Thankfully, that issue is gone. You no longer can brick an item, and you could continually reset your tempers with scrolls of restoration. However, as a result, tempers have been reduced to 1 per item, and also you could directly apply the specific temper you want onto your item, with the only random aspect of it being tied to the range in which that specific temper can roll. Now, this did solve the pain point of bricking items. However, only having 1 temper on an item, in my opinion, is going to see a large reduction in power in certain builds. And frankly, it's going to make 90% of all tempers quite useless, because now, for example, you're never going to choose an offensive temper on your weapon as opposed to the weapon temper, which only can be assigned to that slot. And I imagine that most builds are going to go for either tempers that give them more damage or tempers that give them cooldown reduction. So personally, I feel like tempers feel a little bit less exciting, although I do understand reducing it to 1, as I feel like the power creep that we've been seeing the past few seasons is a little bit unsustainable for the future growth of the game. What do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comments below. So next up are the changes to masterworking. So the issues we had with masterworking prior is that every 4 levels that you masterwork an item, 1 affix gets a bonus boost to it. And if you want to maximize the potential of your character, you want those masterworks to land on the most effective affix that you have on the item. So meaning you want to triple roll those bonuses on a single stat for every item, which had ridiculously low odds and felt like you were just playing a slot machine. Now, with the new tempering system, that is all gone. In fact, tempers no longer directly boost your affixes on an item. Instead, they boost the base stat on fire. For example, if you have a weapon, it's going to boost damage range on that weapon instead. And if you have armor, it's going to boost the armor, and on jewelry, it's going to boost the resistance. The difference too is that instead of masterworking levels, you now have a stat called quality. Quality is maxed at 20, and each time you masterwork an item, the quality goes up anywhere from 2 to 5 levels. Now, once you hit 20, you have the ability to further enhance your item by capstoning it. And what this does is it takes an affix on your item and turns it into a greater affix. This is cool, but the issue I have is, what if you have a unique that's 3 GA? When you go to capstone it, that 4th one's going to get GA no matter what, and I feel like that's a little bit boring. And it also makes it so if you do have a 4 GA item, capstoning it provides no benefit whatsoever. I feel like that should be adjusted by either maximizing the aspect or maybe introduce the Chaos Armor perk that we saw before and maybe capstone the aspect instead. What are your thoughts about how the system could improve? Another thing that I noticed was I felt like leveling up quality constantly, like let's say each time you masterwork an item, the quality only goes up 2 times. You're going to have to hit it 10 different times to be able to max it out to 20. And with the change too, masterworking gives you significantly less power than before. Because beforehand, if you masterworked an item 12 times, every level increases all affixes on that item by 5%. So now you're going to get reduced skill levels. So if you have core skills, all skills, or say passives on your amulet, you're not going to get as much benefit from those anymore because they're not going to increase. And then also there's going to be a significant reduction in the amount of cooldown reduction you're able to have, and the amount of attack speed you can stack, as well as crit chance. So capping those out is now going to be a significantly more difficult affair. And frankly, I can see it breaking many different builds. Next, let's talk about seasonal ranks. So gone is the season journey as well as Renown. Instead, it was replaced by a mechanic called seasonal ranks. Each rank will now replace the rewards from Renown and give you skill points as well as Paragon points for completing different activities within the rank. To progress the rank, capstone dungeons are back, and you need to complete capstone dungeons to move on to that next rank. Now, unlike other activities in the game, capstone dungeons are locked to a level. So the first capstone dungeon is level 30. So you can over level it and crush it quite easily. And if you want a little bit of a challenge, you can try attempting it beforehand as well. And you'll experience this for multiple ranks with capstone dungeons prior to level 60. Now, the issue I have with this is if, say you're level 60 now, you're going to go back and completely flatten those lower level capstones because they're not scaling. And the issue with that is you're not going to receive rewards to your level. So at your level 60, you're seeing level 30 items drop instead. That's not a good feeling. And what I would like to see instead is, I understand keeping the floor of capstone dungeons. So say they don't scale below level 30 for the first one, but I think they should remove the ceiling so that it still scales and feels relevant no matter what level you choose to complete them at. To add to this, you currently only need to complete the capstone to move on in rank. So again, if you were ignoring the mechanic because you were doing the campaign, you're level 60, you want to go back and do it, you can, in practicality, just blast through all the capstone dungeons for each rank back to back to back and unlock all the ranks. Personally, I did end up doing this on the PTR because due to certain mechanics, you're able to level up really quickly. And with the amount of ranks and activities and objectives per rank involved, it felt a little bit overwhelming. And I feel like the seasonal journey helped structure the way you approach different activities in a season. So I feel like that removes part of it. And personally, I would love to see a requirement to complete a couple objectives per rank before you can attempt the capstone dungeon. I think that will bring back the structure that the seasonal journey offers in the first place. And speaking of seasons, let's talk about the seasonal mechanic. So the season theme this time around is actually really cool. Azmodan is back in Sanctuary for the first time ever. He is rallying up the other lesser evils to lead a full-on assault on Sanctuary. So what this entails is lesser evils taking over existing activities. In Helltides, Tyrael will now take the place of the Blood Maiden during Season 11. And with that, you'll find a lot of his maggots prancing around within Helltides as enemies. Also, Belial will now be found as a pit with his scrying eyes placed around the different pit levels. And upon interacting with them and reaching the pit guardian, Belial will spawn in his stead. Azmodan is now permanently added as a world boss, and south of Hawazar, you can actually summon him directly in a Triune Cultist camp. And then lastly, Tyrael is tied to the Undercity, and she can spawn as a boss at the end of that activity. Now, some feedback that I experienced playing through this activity is I felt Tyrael was quite easy fighting him in Helltides, and he felt less threatening than the Blood Maiden. Belial in the pit, I felt like had some issues too. So his eyes that you need to interact with, you need to stop what you're doing and manually click on the eyes to summon the elite pack and clear that out to be able to trigger him being the pit boss at the end. And also, when you do reach the end and you fight him, he does have a pretty long summoning animation as well as death animation, and the timer of the run won't end until his death animation finishes. So if you're tight on time, then Belial could really screw your run over. What I would like to see is having the eyes activate when you stand near them as opposed to clicking on them, and to either get rid of Belial's slow animations at the beginning and at the end, or trigger the completion of the pit right as he dies and before his death animation completes. Also, when it comes to Azmodan, as it was in the PTR, Azmodan's radius or fight zone is really large. So that allowed a lot of people to just AFK farm him in the corner of the arena and give a lot of experience each time he dies. glyphs. I think that to combat this, his experience reward should be significantly reduced, and he should probably interact with his whole arena, or for the arena to shrink so that nobody can just be AFK safe in a corner during that event. And lastly, one thing I was a little bit surprised about is Andariel's inclusion in the Undercity. This will mark the first time in a season where non-expansion players will not be able to interact with everything in a seasonal journey. Now, I understand this is replacing Renown. So for example, in prior seasons, if you didn't have Vessel of Hatred, you were not prone to the skill point and Paragon point rewards from Nahantu. The issue I have here though is that in this season, each of the lesser evils, upon defeating them, they do drop valuable lore journals, which is going to provide additional context to Tyrael and Andariel and give them lines that we never got to experience before. So non-expansion players will be missing out on that. And also, the seasonal mechanic this time around, powers are gone, and instead you get essences which can modify rewards that you obtain in certain activities, as well as punish you if you decide to double dip, adding a little more risk to that gameplay. Personally, I think this is a really cool mechanic because it's one of the first times since probably the Profane Mind Cage that you can modify activities in the game to make them more challenging as well as more rewarding. So personally, I would like to see Andariel's mechanics move to Nightmare Dungeons so that anyone is able to experience them, but alas, this may be the direction moving forward. Now, overall, one stark thing that I did notice with the changes in tempering, with the changes in masterworking, and the lack of seasonal powers, the strength of classes all across the board were definitely squished. Now, I think this is a good thing for the longevity of the game because I don't know if builds should be regularly hitting for hundreds of billions, if not trillions of damage every season, completely flattening everything in Torment 4, which is the highest difficulty in the game. But at the same time, the issues that result from this, you're going to have some classes that won't even be able to max out their glyphs because of the difficulty squish and an inability to clear very high in the pit. Ways to combat this is to reduce the penalty of glyph upgrading depending on the pit level you completed. So with that, I think a lot of these changes coming in are good, and I'm particularly, as a lore nerd, very excited to see Itherael and the lesser evils all returning with additional lore and context behind them. But I think that with these new systems, there are definitely some growing pains that we're seeing, and I hope that they do get adjusted prior to their release in Season 11. There were definitely a lot of changes here, folks, so I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on the matter and how your experience went in the PTR. As always, if you enjoy videos like these, guys, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button, and special thanks to all my supporters. Until next time.